Odle.
I do.
Where you going, though?
Hi back there. Hi up here. Good evening. Oh, thank you. Right on cue. All right. I thought I was going to have a clicker. Brian, I've known you for 40 years or more. I don't know. As you always tease me, I'm terrible with age and times and things like that. There you go. You have to be one of the most easiest people to roast because there is so much material, and I know that's been mentioned. But despite your long list of easily roastable qualities and your good sense of humor, you are a very sensitive guy. And that reminds me of a story. It was early in our partnership. We were dealing with a problem employee, and we were talking about his good attributes and his bad attributes or his problems, and we were having the discussion that every business owner has had. Is this worth pursuing? Should we keep this person? How do we go? And he was an employee, he was a mechanic, and very hard to find. And the topic turned to, well, I finally said, we have to decide if this is something that's really important because everybody has their baggage. And the conversation, because some of us are sensitive, the conversation immediately stopped about the employee, and Brian said, well, what's my baggage? And so, there we go. Thank you. I'll cue you, I promise. But, a week later, Brian sticks his head around the post and says, what's my baggage? And I just laughed, and I never really answered him and said, well, we'll just have to talk about it. And a week later, I get a memo. This is back before text and everything. I get a memo, and it's a memo with a little suitcase drawn on it. What's my baggage? So you can't talk to Brian about sensitive things. So if you want to know what your baggage is, Brian, you're going to hear it all tonight. So you will be an expert, and your question will finally be answered. Next slide, please. There we go. All right. So my speech kind of talks about family. And you need a little brief history of our family to understand where my talk is going. So, as I said, I've known Brian for quite a long time. First as a friend, and then as family, because since he was in high school, and Brian has always had a very, very close relationship with his mother's best friend. His mother's best friend was a woman named Phyllis, kind of like an aunt that you would call somebody that's your aunt or close friend of the family. And this woman, Phyllis, began to date my father, Rick, after some period of time. And when Brian got to college, he started spending more and more time with Phyllis and therefore Rick. And Phyllis and Rick ultimately got married and moved in together and everything. So Brian became a family member. And my father and Phyllis were ultimately married. And I switched back and forth between my father and Rick because I worked with my father in the scrapyard, and I didn't want to call him Rick in front of all the employees. I didn't want to call him Dad in front of all the employees, so I called him Rick. So if I switch back and forth, I don't mean to be confusing, but it is Rick. So during his college years, Brian spent a lot of time with Rick and Phyllis, and he began to look up to my father, Rick, as a mentor or another father figure. So we can switch the slide, please. Brian looked up to Rick so much that many of us observed that he tried to begin living his life just like our father, Rick. And I say our father, my sister Debbie is here tonight. My brother is actually on the phone. While Brian will deny this, he has always followed in Rick's footsteps, trying desperately to be just like him. And no doubt hoping that following in Rick's footsteps, emulating Rick's every move, would lead to similar success in life. Whenever my siblings and I point this out to Brian, he would scoff and deny it all. So Brian, for all to see, let's examine the record. While Brian was in college, he joined the Army. So next slide, please. Rick. My father, Rick, also joined the Army. Brian, who was majoring in criminology. Don't ask me how he's sitting here tonight majoring in criminology. He goes into the scrap business, of course, at Rick's invitation, insistent, or Brian wanting to follow in those footsteps. Brian finds his first real success in the scrap industry as in operations, just like Rick. But then ultimately becomes a buyer in our business, just like Rick. But as a buyer, it can be really complicated. This has already been mentioned tonight, but taking customers to sporting events, no problem. But what if the customer wants to take you to dinner? Sushi, anybody? Who here has eaten with Brian? Who here has eaten with Brian? And I know this has been mentioned, but so we could get to the next slide, please. Click. So this is Happy Brian. So Rick was a very picky eater, so I guess Brian thought I was okay. He basically ate like 3 foods, meat and potatoes and maybe some Italian thrown in. So just like Rick, Brian liked his meat and potatoes. I have no idea how Brian ever survived his recent trips to India, the Middle East, Japan. Brian, did you take like an extra suitcase with you filled with Snicker bars to get along? Anyways, Brian has really grown in this regard and now happily tries all the new dishes wherever he goes. He's really grown, and here he is trying some Indian food. Next, please. My dad is on the right there. The Steeler game. So Rick likes sports. So Brian likes sports. Right? Okay. My dad, Rick, was a huge Steeler fan. There we go. That's me at the 79 Super Bowl. And so Brian, naturally, is a Steeler fan. Okay, one more, please. I'm sorry. Now, Rick was really fussy about hotels and traveling in general, but everything he had to do had to be high end. It had to be the best. And now that Brian has seen a little bit of success, he's become really fussy about hotel too, just like Rick. My dad happened to favor the Ritz-Carlton. In fact, he lived in a Ritz-Carlton on Singer Island. Where do you think Brian stays when he travels and he gets to pick where he stays? Just like Rick. And Brian's also fussy about traveling in another way. When he gets too far away from his home base, not really sure how to say this. I think everybody's done with dinner. Public places, public bathrooms. Those of you who travel with Brian, if you notice, he won't eat before you have to travel somewhere, before you have to get on an airplane because of the fear of those airplane bathrooms. It's he just went just like Rick. But now Brian has really taken this to an extreme. Brian already travels with an extra suitcase filled with Snickers, and now he needs to take another suitcase to bring. Yeah. At first I felt sorry for Leticia, but she is a certified germaphobe. Safety first, right, Leticia? The similarities and the manner in which Brian emulates Rick, it's a really long list, but I promise to keep this short. So Brian dresses just like Rick. Brian bought a house that looks just like Rick's. He brings home his dry cleaning and changes it to the good hangers. I'm not kidding. Just like Rick. He drives a Porsche, just like Rick. Brian loves Las Vegas and gambling. Just like Rick. I don't know where we're at on the picture. I can't see. Okay. And there are other unexplained similarities that are there's no words to describe. There we go. Yeah. I don't have a good explanation for that one. Oh man, I'm hot. I looked up to my father, and clearly so did Brian. Brian once told me that for all Rick did for him, Brian hoped that he made Rick proud. Well, okay, can we switch the slide, please? Thank you. Brian, I am here to tell you that in this room full of ISRI colleagues, work colleagues, in the back there, friends and family, we are all really proud of you. Can we all stand, please? I really want everybody to stand. Oh, I forgot my prop. Can we all stand and show Brian that we're all really proud of him, and give him a big round of applause, please? And Brian, I know we're 100% certainty that if Rick was here, he would be proud of you too. So proud that you made a successful career in this scrap business. We could keep standing, that's good. We're gonna do this again. So proud that you've helped your industry, and so proud that you have a family. You know, speaking of family, in my history lesson of how Brian came in, I forgot to mention how Phyllis, Brian's mom's best friend, ended up in our family. So, next picture. There we go. How did Rick and Phyllis meet? You see, Phyllis worked at the same scrapyard that Rick worked at. So Rick married his secretary. Next slide, please. Just like Rick. Leticia, you still here? You haven't walked out of the room yet? I know. But anyways, I want to have one more toast to Brian. So everybody raise a glass. I gotta help. That's why I'm undressing. All right, I don't have a glass, but cheers to Brian. Thank you, good job, Mazel tov, and welcome back to the scrap business.